Hi there, I'm Phoebe Bowden for Staff Treats. Before we begin today, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Area Works at Collindale. Today I'm joined by award-winning HR specialist Rebecca Bull. She runs two businesses. Rebecca, can you tell me a little bit about it, just what you do?
Thank you, Phoebe, and it's great to be here. So I run my own HR consultancy, which started 7 years ago actually, part-time, and then I decided to take the plunge 3.5 years ago to spend all my time and efforts developing the business. So the business is called MyHRHub, and I'm based in the East Midlands, although working with clients all over the UK and Europe and some overseas further afield. So the consultancy is based on a very generalist model that I've been working in for the last 20 good years in HR in large organisations across the world. And for me, I had a real passion for startups, and I wanted to help startup businesses and SMEs, so small, medium-sized enterprises, as well as fast growth companies, because that was the experience I had in my previous roles in head of HR roles. And for me, I was just very keen on helping lots of businesses at the same time, and that's very difficult to do if you are working just for one organisation. So MyHRHub was born. It's a pick and mix model, and it's working very much in partnership with the suppliers that I worked with previously in the corporate world. So I partnered with them, approached them to say, this is my mad idea, would you like to work with me and help all these small businesses just get along, because life's hard enough effectively. And they were wonderful and said, yes, we want to work with you, carry on working with you. And so MyHRHub was launched 3.5 years ago.
Can you tell me a little bit about what are the specific challenges that those startups and those small businesses and the rapid growth businesses face that you might not think of when you're traditionally dealing with HR for a big company?
That's a great question. It's really broad. So my clients range from a one-man band, literally, starting up, so wanting to get general advice on infrastructure and frameworks, and then my largest client is probably about 500. So because I've previously worked in about 15 startups and fast growths, I know what's coming over the hill, so I can help them work and develop the businesses and start from very basic standard handbooks, contracts, for example, which is employment law. You have to have those in place, right through to starting to recruit their first members of staff, and then as they go along, it's quite a cyclical process. So they'll go through wanting to know more about staff engagement when they've got perhaps 10, 20 employees. Then they'll probably want to understand more about team dynamics, so we can help them with psychometric testing. And then they may get to a point where they want to talk about strategy, mergers, acquisitions, globalization. So it really is very, very different.
For those startups out there and those businesses beginning right from scratch, they've got money and they've got to manage it. How much of a return do people see when they invest in HR? You know, obviously it's going to be challenging for any business getting started, and some might be a bit reluctant to spend the money on good HR advice. But what sort of returns does it give to a business?
Okay, that's a really good question. HR professionals that really understand businesses can get under the skin of a business and convince the managing directors that this isn't just about contracts and disciplinary processes. This goes much more towards the bottom line, to how the company is perceived, affects attraction and retention of employees and general engagement of employees too. So my model is very much based on employee engagement. Most of the MDs in a high growth mindset understand that people are really intrinsic to that growth and the success of the business. So I have probably a harder time of convincing these managers, or MDs or CEOs, that they need to adopt really good people practices in order for them to get and achieve their business goals. Most of them are there, especially if they're have gone through education where they've really understood the people element and how important that is. But there are organisations where they are quite anti really embracing the HR role, and I think that's due to lack of understanding. The HR role traditionally has been fun police, somebody in the corner with ticking the boxes, and that's the very old style HR. And HR is, actually that word itself don't particularly agree with. It's people. It's just about resources. What's that all about? It's about people. And the more you understand people, what motivates them, the more you can really get the best from them. And that's what businesses should be doing, is getting the best from their employees. So where are the sweet spots? What do they have to do to really bring out the best of those, bring out the best of the employees?
Just on that point, in making a business appealing, we hear stories about what it's like to work for Google or Facebook, or one of those big companies that prides itself on investing in employees. Do you have perhaps some fun examples of companies that you've seen that do something, go the extra mile for their staff?
There are lots of different organisations do different things. So some examples of engaging events that some of the more innovative businesses would do. Very recently, this week in fact, they invited all of their teams to take part in a Christmas wreath making evening. Yeah, so this is a very fantastic business in Nottingham, and it was in the evening in the office. They had some snacks and food and drinks and things, and they were all making Christmas wreaths, and I thought that was really quite cool. Other companies organise sort of summer events, and they rent teepees, and they have campfires and etc. So that's some other great engaging things that they can do.
But do you find that these companies see a real return when they do invest in employees, when they do maybe adopt that new HR approach of trying to lure people rather than just being the fun police, as you said? Do they see results and returns?
I definitely think they do. I was lucky enough to find enough businesses that actually want to be great employers. So my support to the businesses that I work with is purely around becoming employers of choice, so people that would choose to work for these companies if they could. So lots of the work we do together with them is on that basis, that we are really trying to find the individual motivations of each employee to ensure that they can actually have a really fulfilling career. And I think it's getting more challenging. They're epidemic with mental health at the moment, which doesn't discriminate over kind of age or background, and all the companies I'm working with at the moment, some way or shape or form, are dealing with some really tricky issues and some very challenging times. And I think when you have those challenging times, that's when you really understand what kind of employer you're working for. Is that employer being supportive? Are they really trying to help you and support you, even if they are out of work issues that are causing the concerns? And I think for me that's a true test. And they're the employees that I just absolutely love supporting, because they will ultimately have the best businesses, where you can forget about bottom line and profit. You just let the business roll, and then the business itself becomes successful.
Is there one piece of advice that you can give to people that is perhaps the biggest HR mistake that people make? That you've got 2 decades of experience. What's the biggest mistake that you see made time and time again?
It's not compulsory, but it should be. Have a job description. So job descriptions go through the whole employee life cycle, from the advert to the recruitment, to the interview, to the performance management, to the exit, to the redundancy if that's needed. And some companies just don't have them. So it's very hard to support those processes without basic facts of knowing what somebody should be doing at work. So that would be my number 1 tip. My second tip is also something that's not compulsory, is to have a company handbook. So again, contractually, you have to have written terms. you don't have, at this moment in time, have to have a company handbook, but it's the rules of how the business works, and it works both ways. So that would be my second tip. Definitely get a handbook. In the absence of these two, this is where I see lots of the problems. There are so many problems, and these are the solutions. And the third one would be train your line managers, because your line managers are at the coalface and they are representing the business. Now, if the managers aren't trained in basic managing people and aren't aware what's in the handbook, or even from a statutory point of view what their employees are entitled to and how, or what the obligations are as an employer, they can do quite a lot of damage. And it's not fair. They have so many tasks to do themselves, their day job, managing people. So definitely train your line managers.
Do you often get people who, you've spoken a lot today about people who do all the right things, put all the steps in place, but do you get people calling you up who haven't done those things and then it all falls apart? The disaster and the emergency calls?
It doesn't happen often because my model is working proactively with businesses, so working with employees, so the employees have access to me, and working future focus. What do we need to put in place? Building blocks. And so I didn't want to be a consultancy where somebody would call me when something's gone wrong. For example, I've had 2 calls this morning on the way on the train with companies I've never heard about to say, this has happened, how do I actually work through this? And I think if they'd been advised correctly to start, those issues wouldn't have happened, i.e. a handbook, clear policies and practices, for example. So, but there are moments when with clients, I can't tell them what they should be doing. I'll give them options, generally low risk, medium risk and a high risk. And it really is up to them to then choose which way they want to go down. And invariably, if they go the high risk option, as long as I'm clear what the impact could be, it's those situations that come back to bite them, where it's the phone call to say, I know you said I probably shouldn't, but I did because I just wanted the problem to go away. So it happens very rarely now, which is great. But there are moments when things just do happen and you can't predict them, and that's challenging. It's challenging for businesses.
Now, Rebecca, we're going into the Christmas party season, or the silly season, and that can be a little bit high risk, especially when a few too many drinks are involved. Do you have any hot tips or any HR insight for surviving the workplace Christmas party?
Yeah, and it's very topical, as you say. And next week we've got a webinar all about how to handle the Christmas party. So my top tips would be to have a policy in place about consuming alcohol when it's deemed a working event. So Christmas party would be a working event. I would also think about restrictions of alcohol. So the free beer, the free wine, the unlimited tokens, for example, very generous but not really a good idea. And believe you me, although I get invited to most of the clients' Christmas parties now, I generally don't attend because I know in January I'll be picking up the calls of what's happened. So I think from that point of view, be very clear about your liability and know that there is a liability and a duty of care when you take employees out for any social event, but certainly Christmas party. Definitely try and limit the tokens and limit the amount of alcohol that you provide free of charge. I would always suggest you try and keep somebody there who can stay sober. So somebody is not going to actually indulge. So that might be a director, for example. I've had countless years in January trying to piece together hazy situations when it really is, I really can't remember. I think at that point I just blacked out. So yeah, it happens in every January, but I think what employees are now doing, they're more savvy and they actually know the liability is there for the employer. And incidentally, yesterday on an employment law seminar, there's a current case with a very well-known organisation in the UK about a Christmas party where a gentleman had too much to drink, picked up one of his colleagues, female, and dropped her on the dance floor, and she suffered a severe back injury, and she's now suing the organisation, and it's still being worked through in terms of the outcome. So there is a liability there. Don't assume there isn't. Reduce the drinks as much as you can. What happens after they leave the party is their choice. And then also definitely just try and keep some people who are able to keep control of the situation and identify any scenarios that could be a problem later down the line. Communicate that policy out. That's the main thing as well. Make sure that's communicated to everybody before you commence with your Christmas festivities.
Rebecca Bull, award-winning HR consultant, thank you so much for joining me today for Staff Treats. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please subscribe to the channel. There'll be more videos and more experts just like Rebecca Bull coming up.